Assalamu alaikum, my name is Fadl Wazwaz. I'm going to be doing a presentation today on chapter 6 of my book, God Intervenes Between a Person and Their Heart. This particular chapter follows the chapter on lessons from Prophet Adam and also the one between those two chapters, which is the resolute prophets in dealing with rejection. Some of the sources that I have used for writing this particular chapter is the book by Suzanne Hanif, A History of the Prophets of Islam. And another is the commentary, the scholarly commentary of Imam Sha'rawi on the Prophet Noah. Now what I'm giving you today, like what I'm discussing today, is kind of like with every story, I just take a small slice, a small lesson, and try to show how we can reflect on it in today's times. I cannot give you like the entire in-depth, breadth, if you will, analysis and reflection about Prophet Noah, but I would recommend highly that you do take time and read the story. These are the stories that Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, had to listen to. Like God shared these stories to strengthen his resolve, to make him more steadfast. So these were the stories that were used to nurture Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, that God gave to Prophet Muhammad to nurture him. Obviously, they're going to nurture us. And I learned from Imam Sha'rawi that one of the things that every prophet had to deal with was rejection. I mentioned that in the last chapter about the resolute prophets in dealing with rejection, and one of the five resolute prophets is Prophet Noah, and extensive rejection that he faced from his people. Now, between Prophet Noah and between Prophet Adam, upon him peace, and Prophet Noah, upon him peace, there are 10 generations. So Prophet Adam, when he came, he didn't have a community to call to God, people to God. However, that community, he had children, and there was, the story of Cain and Abel, where one brother killed another. And this is really the story of humanity. It's not that we're fallen creatures, it's that we are creatures who can do good, but we can also do evil. And this does have an impact on society if we do not, if you will, like push evil back in its, call it out, or, make sure that it does not continue, because if it does continue from generation to generation to generation, this is the time when Prophet Noah comes in, and God will send a prophet. And when God sends a prophet, I mentioned this in one of the blogs, it's usually like the last sign before a major trial comes, or a major flood, or a major disaster. And that's usually like results in completely wiping out the entire community. So it reaches to a point where no one's calling people to God, and they're constantly doing things that causing mischief and more mischief and more mischief. And then the last sign that God brings to people is a prophet, and that prophet will come with proofs. He will not be somebody who is not trustworthy and is not honest. He will be someone who's trustworthy, he's honest, but he will come with proofs from God, and he himself will be a proof to the community. So I'm going to discuss from my book some of that information, and then I will get into some of the verses from the Quran. In future videos, I will take some time and just learn some of the lessons, not to go in depth again into the story, but hopefully it will get people excited to either purchase this book or just go into a commentary on Prophet Noah. Again, these are the stories that nurtured Prophet Muhammad. So we should really know them more in detail and more in depth, instead of like other stories that are just all sensationalism, and they have really nothing like to nurture you internally to deal with uncertainty, or to deal with fear, or to deal with failure, or how to like have a holistic look at reality. So let me just share my book, and here. I'm just going to go to the beginning of this chapter. So Noah and the most abject amongst us. So he comes, to his community. He doesn't come again attacking them, bashing them. But like I said, within those 10 generations, people have went astray and astray and astray, and they kept going astray until, God, out of his mercy, sends a messenger to call them back. Now he wants to forgive them. He's merciful. He's a forgiving Lord, and we learned that again in chapter on Adam, lessons on forgiveness and repentance. So he's a perpetual forgiver. So from the Quran in chapter 71, this is a chapter on the Prophet Noah, from verse 5 to 10, he says, "My Lord, indeed I invited people to truth night and day, but my invitation increased them not except in flight. And indeed, every time I invited them that you may forgive them, they put their fingers in their ears, covered themselves with their garments, persisted, and were arrogant with great arrogance. Then I invited them publicly. Then I announced to them and also confided to them secretly and said, ask forgiveness of your Lord. Indeed, he's ever a perpetual forgiver." So all the prophets didn't come really to dismantle and destroy abusive power and oppression, but to organize the oppressed and build their own power grounded in faith. Yet dismantling oppression never means becoming the oppressor. Islam doesn't aim to turn us into fighters against abusive power. Rather, the prophets came to humanity to enjoin us to worship God, witness his power and strength. His calling necessitates facing enemies, both individuals and groups, that impede these teachings. Pushing these enemies back within their boundaries is a mean, but it's not an end. The Prophet Noah, upon him peace, for his part, spent hundreds of years calling to the message, like calling people and calling, it says 950 years. One thing to note is not everybody who is marginalized and oppressed actually has a hatred of oppression. What they have is a hatred of not being accepted by the oppressor. If I can go in detail, it's like, for example, if the oppressor, say Pharaoh, accepts them, then they are very happy to support the oppression. If the Pharaoh does not accept them, then it appears to people that they're attacking oppression, when in reality they're really attacking the oppressor's rejection of them. If you listen to some of these individuals, they have an awe of the oppressor. Like they look at them with awe. Instead of having, this is one of the value of praising God and keep praising God, is you protect your heart from having awe of an oppressor, awe of a narcissist. You're always like, your heart is always looking at, in awe at God. Not that we could see him, but we always have this awe in our heart of God. So this protects us from desiring to be accepted by the oppressor. We're desiring to be, like, for God to be pleased with us. Now, amongst the minority groups and among the powerful were with the prophets. And their fate was that of those protected by God Most High. We saw that even during the times of Prophet Muhammad. So it helps them again to know what to expect. Noah knew very well that abusive power benefits from and relies on the mechanisms of oppression. He also knew that abusers look down on the oppressed. So when Noah appears in the Quran, again, he's bringing God's truth around the world, yet the powerful scorn Noah, seeing him as a mortal, human like themselves. They sneered as they saw somebody being followed, not by the rich and powerful, like usually the very first people that follow a prophet is the one who are going to benefit from the message of a prophet. It's usually those who are vulnerable and oppressed. We don't see anything in thee but a moral man like ourselves. That's their argument. And we don't see that any follow thee save those who are quite obviously the most abject amongst us. And we don't see that you could be in any way superior to us. On the contrary, we think you are liars. So, false accusation, you're not VIP, and they're not even going to look at the argument. So the powerful here are looking for what? Angels, not for fellow human beings. They scorn the idea of someone being associated with the vulnerable and marginalized. Not one of them asks, Noah, where's your evidence? Where's your argument? Let's study it and see if it's true. Instead, the mere fact that someone of a lower social status might approach them angers the powerful. Noah says they shouldn't worry because he doesn't mean to force anything upon them. Again, there is no compulsion in religion. Can we force it on you even though it may be hateful to you? So where you see force and manipulation and compulsion, those are manifestations that what the person is calling to is falsehood. All he's asking of them is that they take the message of God into consideration. He tells the assembled that he asks no benefit. This is a message many of the prophets repeat. As he speaks, Prophet Noah doesn't draw from his own feelings, opinions, or desires. He's instead working from a sense of responsibility and accountability before God. He can't turn his back on the unprotected or oppressed. He's embracing all as God would want. He asks the powerful, O my people, who would shield me from God were I to repulse them, the powerful and the marginal, because they wanted him to, if you're going to talk with us, you've got to get rid of these abject people from around. Will you not then keep this in mind? So he's coming here delivering a message. Some individuals come running and accept this message. And the powerful feel like you can't communicate with us if these are the people around you. But the powerful and those who follow them have no desire to listen. Instead, they tell him scornfully to bring violence or go away. So that's, again, their argument. I'm not going to listen to you. And some people cannot believe in God unless they see a lightning hit them. This is a form of arrogance. Abusive power doesn't respect facts, evidence, or even stories. If they sat down and heard about how these people were abused or oppressed, they're not interested. It respects only power that can keep it in check or knock it down. Sometimes people say, why does God punish people? At the same time, that's all they're open to. They're not open to listening to facts. They're not open to listening to arguments. They're not open to listening to any critical thinking, presentation. All they're open to is, if what you say is true, bring it on. This is what they're open to. And so when God responds to what they're open to and based on what they're opening to, then they, if you will, seem to not believe their own reality. It's like then they say, well, why did God do this? Why did God punish us? Why did God, it's like But that's all you're open to. The Prophet Noah came and asked you to turn to God and seek forgiveness. The call was to seek forgiveness. God is perpetual forgiver. He's not desiring to punish you. He wants to forgive you. His desire is to forgive you and to benefit you and to help you and to nurture you. But their response is punish us, bring down the punishment. We'll consider your argument, but only if you can bring us down. This is a false sense of power. So how does Prophet Noah, upon him peace, respond? Does he again believe God is wrapped around his little finger, get into tit for tat, such that he can call out and God will come and knock others down? You can't provoke God with your arrogance. Noah can only shrug and say, only God can bring it upon you if he so wills. Again, we don't control God and can't provoke God and how he will respond. But we do know that there's an appointed time that if people who are oppressors do not take heed, then the punishment will come and they shall not elude it. Like all the prophets, Noah strives to present an argument without trying to overpower, manipulate, or threaten. He's resigned to the fact that he can do his best and no more. Speaking truth to power is exerting yourself within your boundaries and values while leaving the results to God. Prophet Noah called people to faith in God, and the powerless and marginal here referred to those who accepted his call and believed. However, it's important to note that not all marginalized groups accept the call to faith. In 950 years, Noah was able to convince only 80 followers. Still, he persisted, even though his very own son did not accept the message, which clearly caused Noah grief. So I want to stop here because at times people look at this in two ways. Just say there's two families, or three actually. And one family exerts, kind of like shows resolve and exerts, we won't say like Prophet Noah, but and they exert themselves at doing and putting all the effort. And they face a trial similar to Prophet Noah. Another family does not exert themselves at all. And they face a trial similar to Prophet Noah, like their children went away. A third family, actually, let's just say it's four families. The third family does not exert itself, and they found a pious child. Like they were probably astray, and they found a pious child. A fourth family, exerts themselves, and they found a pious child. Now, how do we look at all of these? You're going to be held accountable to the effort you made, not the results. So, for those who did not see the results, look to your efforts. If the efforts showed that you followed God and you exerted and you showed resolve, then you will be rewarded similar to how believers are rewarded. Now, if you did not show effort and you did not show resolve and you were negligent, you will be held accountable for that negligence and that heedlessness. You'll not be held accountable to the results. We'll talk about the next two stories. But you will be held accountable to the effort made. So if you did not make an effort, doesn't matter what the result is, you're going to be held accountable or rewarded based on the effort made. Now, in the next two families, one, like I said, doesn't work hard and they get a result. The other one works hard and they get a result. Again, like here we saw, Noah worked very hard, but he did not have the result that Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, had. He's still one of the most resolute prophets and his story was used to nurture Prophet Muhammad. There's a chapter in the Quran called Noah. He will be rewarded for his resolve. But if you have done nothing and God tests you, because this is another way that God tests you, let's just say you had a pious child, you will not be rewarded for that child. Because the effort was not there. You will be rewarded for your efforts. Now, if you worked hard and you saw results, if you attribute the results to yourself and to your efforts, then you will have nullified and made void all your efforts, because we don't enter heaven by our works, we enter it by God's mercy and grace. However, if you look at the results as a gift from God, and that God has chose you to open those doors, then you're not pointing at the fact that this is from you, but you're acknowledging that this is from God. Everything that all the openings are from God, like when Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessing, despite the effort and the resolve and the persecution he faced, and he enters Mecca, he enters it in a humble state. He enters it with his head, kind of when he's on his horse, prostrating in a humble state. So he's attributing all that effort and all that work to who? To God. Even though the results is there, he's attributing it all to God, that God opened that opening for him. So while we are not in control, we should look to our efforts, and even within our efforts, if we see that we are making good effort, we should attribute that effort to God. And if we find that we don't have good effort, then we should again turn to God and ask him for the strength to be able to make such an effort, to give us the ability to focus, to give us the ability to understand the faith. So we should turn to God, seeking the effort. Having said that, I'd like to now continue with the issue of we're not in control. So Noah calls on his Lord and says, "My Lord, indeed my son is of my family. And indeed your promise is true, and you are the most just of judges." He said, "O Noah, indeed he's not of your family. Indeed he's one of those whose work was other than righteous. So ask me not for that about which you have no knowledge. Indeed I advise you, lest you be among the ignorant." Noah says, "My Lord, I seek refuge in you from asking that of which I have no knowledge. Unless you forgive me and have mercy upon me, I will be among the losers." Now again, you could see the "unless you forgive me and have mercy upon me, I will be among the losers." Similar to that repetition from Prophet Adam when he had been negligent and he said, "Unless you forgive me and have mercy upon us, we'll be among the losers." So it's that loss of that relationship, the loss of the covenant that you have made with God. But an important thing here in this particular passage is his turning to God and saying, "I seek refuge in you from asking that of which I have no knowledge." So lean not in similar in the Bible, lean not into your own understanding. So God is telling him here to trust him. But at times, here it's a different type of trust. At times, like with the angels, why did you choose Adam, when we have just seen such creatures create mischief and violence on earth? And so God tells him not to go beyond, the questioning, that I know what you do not know. So they immediately know not to ask further. And so you see this here now, again, that very same repetition in the story of Noah, which is, I advise you, lest you be among the ignorant, that do not ask me about what you have no knowledge. So again, we're reminded from the story of Adam going forward to the story of Noah. While we can, out of human nature, turn to God and ask questions, and here he's seeing this is his son, and it's natural human tendency to plead and appeal for your child, we should make that prayer that Prophet Noah made to give us the strength to know when to stop the questioning and when to recognize that God does not owe us, again, an explanation. Again, God does not owe us an explanation. My Lord, I seek refuge in you. Who's he seeking refuge in? From asking that of which I have no knowledge. So it's good to have that verse memorized and just to repeat it at times, like if Satan is going to call you, away from the path and make you question things that are happening. It's good to respond, I found, with that particular prayer. My Lord, I seek refuge in you from asking that of which I have no knowledge. So if you make it a habit to say that particular prayer, over time, like whenever you turn to God, God is very generous and he responds. So just know what to ask for. And here, again, the Prophet Noah story teaches us what to ask for. One of the hardest things for any parent, again, is to see a child go astray. Parents, as the faithful, sometimes, we see our children following a different path. When the flood came, Noah's son didn't want to board the boat or the ark. Rather, he rejected the invitation to faith, wanting to stay behind with his powerful friends. Noah could not convince his son otherwise. Noah pleaded with God to save his son, saying, "Verily, my son is of my family." And this is because God had told him that he's going to protect him and his family, but now he realized that family is not just blood ties. We told Noah that his son's actions were unrighteous, and thus his son had chosen his own family among the ignorant. God certainly did not tell Noah to go after his son and drag him back to the right path. You're on the ark, there's a flood. As they say, like when you're in a plane, the very first person you got to put the mask on is yourself, and then you put it on your child. Now, if your child doesn't want to put on the oxygen mask, you can do so much before you have to accept that you can't really bring them to the right path. Now, this doesn't mean that you give up at the very first call. You call and you call and you call. Like he pleaded and pleaded even after the flood took his son, he pleaded with God. So that shows again his love and his, being a father, his genuine concern. You don't want to be like, I don't care. But then God is going to rebuke you and tell you when to stop. And this is why it's helpful to keep saying that prayer. I seek refuge in you from asking of which I have no knowledge. So we can be attentive and we can be open to the call to stop in our questioning. Sometimes people justify the extremes of their violence and anger by claiming the support of Islamic law. And the reason I use this particular story is because at that time, there were quite a few stories on honor killing. And they are transgressions against humanity and a horrible practice of Islam. While Islamic teachings do teach modesty and do teach, like gender relationships based on dignity and honor, that you cannot be alone together and stuff, it does not teach that you can go and kill somebody because they went astray. So I use that story to, again, this is one of the lessons we can get if we are facing those similar trials in your own life experiences. We can guide our children to the very best of our abilities. What you can check, actually, is look at your actions and your efforts. Did you fulfill what God asked you to fulfill with regards to the rights of the child? Did you make the effort to raise the child to the best that you can? If you have, and God has chose that they go astray, or that he allowed them to go astray and they had chose the path of going astray, then we can pray to God, not saying, not exceeding the limits, But we have to leave things in God's hands. God shows us this repeatedly in the Quran. Even family members of the prophets can take the wrong path. And the prophets must love them while also letting them choose their own way. The other lesson is that family isn't destiny. This is what we see throughout the stories of the prophets. It doesn't mean you should be against your family and cut off your family, but it does mean that even those who have prophets as parents may not be righteous. So indeed, every person will be judged on their own merits. Each person must examine themselves as an individual, and righteous parents don't give anyone a free ticket. So if your father is a sheikh and they're righteous, but you're not following the law and you're not righteous, that doesn't give you a free ticket to heaven. That's also another lesson in the story of Noah. This is also not just with regards to family. A lot of times, even the Muslim community, we want a free ticket based on Umar al-Khattab, or we want a free ticket to heaven based on Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, or we want a free ticket to heaven based on, again, the noble and the righteous people of the past who fulfilled the spirit and letter of the law. And so we think because, the righteous deeds that they've done, and we believe the righteous deeds that they've done, that we can just get a free ticket and kind of ride our way to heaven. This also tells us that our works have to manifest what we claim to believe. So it's supposed to be kind of like a wake-up call for us, that you also have to check the effort you are making. It's not sufficient to just assume because your parent is righteous or your company is righteous, so therefore you can just ride your way. And an example of that is Satan was surrounded by angels, but he wasn't righteous. He was not being impacted by it. So it's a wake-up call for the individual. It's not for you to judge others again. You shouldn't be going you running around town judging people. But it's a wake-up call that don't be so negligent and think, well, I am around my righteous people, or my family is a righteous people, or I follow these righteous sheikhs. So that's a free ticket for you to go to heaven. You should actually be privately turning to God, asking for forgiveness, asking for guidance, and making sure that your works, to the best that you can, reflect your faith. It's not just all lip service. Everyone has to consider the message of truth for themselves, and everyone has to investigate it, and everyone has to turn to God and focus on their sense of responsibility. And we see that in the story of Prophet Jonah, who said, if they charged you with falsehood, say, my work to me and yours to you. You are free from responsibility for what I do, and I for what you do. We have a responsibility, for example, to stop our siblings and neighbors from hurting others. Doesn't mean, again, we don't get involved in the sense that if we see somebody engaging in oppression, we stay silent. Part of our responsibility in being accountable is to stop the oppressor. In the case of harm, we're obligated to push people back within their boundaries. If family member is a murderer, for instance, we have to stop them. We will not be asked about others' sins. We'll only be asked about our own. So if it's things that matters of private sins or things that do not result into the oppression of others, then you're only going to be asked about yourself. Now, if someone is drinking and they're doing it privately, you're not going to be asked about his drinking problem. Now, if that person gets into a car, then you should try and stop him, because he's not just going to be harming himself. He's also going to be harming others. And so you have a responsibility to stop somebody from getting in a car who's drinking, because he might end up killing an innocent human being. So Noah's son tells his father that he intends to follow the oppressors instead of those who are rightly guided. He was an accomplice perhaps, but he didn't do any harm, and thus Noah had to let him go. Now he did plead with God. Again, it's not a letting go of I don't care, There's an effort, there's resolve there. He's trying, he's calling, but he cannot force it upon him, as he said, if he's averse to it. At times, for any of us, family members can be a trial and a tribulation. We must call ourselves to account and not be obsessed with running after other people's sins. What's left for us to do? We must have a good opinion of the individual at all times and keep making prayers. Having done this duty, we have to let go. We can call people to the truth, but what other people do is not in our control. Whatever God wills, that is in God's domain. Now, to give an example of in the Quran where we see a similar story, and again, each story of the Quran reinforces the other story. Each story reinforces and strengthens and nurtures the other stories. So as I talked about, we're not in control, and I talked about results. This doesn't mean that if you don't see results, you don't put in the effort. You still put in the effort. You're going to be called to account for the effort. So here now we're talking about speaking truth to power is not about results. And I'm looking at chapter 36 in the Quran, Surah Yasin, or the chapter Yasin, and it's verse 20-21. And there came from the farthest end of the city running, this is a man, he said, "O my people, follow the messengers, follow those who do not ask of you any payment, and they are rightly guided." Now in the Quran's 36th surah, a man named Habib Najar, he also was the carpenter. They say Prophet Noah upon him, peace, was a carpenter. Habib Najar was a very charitable man who was known to have given half of his earnings to those in the community who needed help. But Habib Najar was not a wealthy man, nor was he one of the city's notables. Instead, he was a very sick man who suffered from leprosy and lived at the outskirts of his city. When we first hear about Habib Najar, he arrives from the outskirts of town, running to come to the defense of the prophets. He doesn't arrive again like a hero. He's neither powerful nor strong, and although he's a kind man, he's not acclaimed, talented, or famous. Again, we don't want to assume that everybody who's a marginal person is not an oppressor. Like I mentioned in a story that you could be homeless and be an oppressor. Like if you read of stories of people who've raped others and they're homeless. So you could, this is not, you have to look at the whole picture and see how that person lives in that state of being, if you will, rejected. Like he's in the farthest outskirts of the city. Is he a kind person? Is he a nice person, or is he somebody who's abusing others? So he comes, like I said, from the outskirts of the city, but he's coming here to support the messengers. So instead of being well regarded for his charity because of his altered appearance, people heaped mockery and ridicule on Habib Najar, which was why he lived at the outskirts of town. That's where he was when two messengers arrived with word from the divine and were denied. The third messenger was sent to confirm that they were indeed sent to the town by God. The people in power, the city's notables, denied these prophets because they were not angels, but they were instead fellow humans. They couldn't believe that these two could have something special to impart, as they didn't come robed or jeweled. But they couldn't have been angels, as angels can't be seen by the human eye, since they are made of light. Also, angels wouldn't be the right messengers for humanity, as angels don't experience the pain and the suffering, the struggles that we do. So how can they help us to be patient on some issues? I mean, they can probably give us messages, inspire us, but we cannot see them, so how can we interact with them and engage them? The notables of the city were rigid in not accepting the message, but when the prophets spoke, again, remember in the last chapter I said, listening versus distraction, manipulation versus persuasion. So here Habib Najar was persuaded. He listened, he was persuaded, he comes running. And the others were manipulative. So they wanted to manipulate and they wanted to also distract. He wasn't the only one who had heard the prophet's message. The powerful of the city also heard, and they were clearly shaken by, again, the wakener, the shaker. He's trying to shake to be open to what is beneficial for them. So again, very similar to Noah's story, they called the prophets liars. It's the number one thing that every prophet has to face is not just rejection, but being accused of being liars. And this doesn't come with, like they say, the proof is the one who's raising the accusation. Like, if I'm going to accuse you of something, if I'm going to accuse you of being a liar, then the burden of proof is upon you. Someone doesn't have to prove their innocence. You have to prove that they are a liar. And so though instead of proving they are a liar, they just call them a liar. And they keep calling them liars. And they also order them to stop speaking. The prophets, said that they only come to speak and give clear notification. So again, all they're doing is trying to persuade, trying to get people to listen so that they can consider what's beneficial for them. There's no compulsion, there's no overpowering or trying to manipulate them. They weren't seeking also recompense, like give me money or something. The powerful of the city wanted the prophets to stop. Indeed, the powerful said, we consider you a bad omen. The city's leaders ordered the prophet to desist, or else we will surely stone you. So now it went from manipulation, but then you could see now there is I'm going to not just silence you, but torture you. Not just killing the prophets, again, but torture. So the prophets, for their part, used only words reminding the people of the truth that they could feel buried in their souls. We must ask ourselves, why were the cities wealthy and powerful so agitated? Why did they want to punish the messengers, threatening them with torture and violence instead of responding with speech? The prophets stood their ground. They told the men and women of the city that a message of justice seems like a bad omen only to those who know they are transgressing the boundaries of others. Your omen is with yourselves. This is when, again, Habib Najar arrives. One of the things that they say, and I learned this again from listening to some of the commentaries. Of course, they're like 18 hours, 5 hours on YouTube, and people only look for 10, 20 minutes. But I would encourage you, you don't have to listen to it in one sitting. Like you could just listen, if you're just the kind that likes to listen to 10 minutes at a time. Listen 10 minutes and then 10 minutes, and pretty soon you really will get into it, and you'll be able to finish hour by hour, and you'll be able to listen to the whole thing. People sometimes watch like a series on who knows what, and they'll do binge watching. I think you could do kind of like a binge watching of some of these stories. They do have tremendous lessons. But here I want to stop, and I want you to kind of pause. This is something that I noticed about the Quran, that when someone is coming to deliver a message from God, that God supports the message, and it's a person of, again, not just any marginalized, because there are marginalized people who have a love-hate relationship for the Pharaoh. This is a marginalized person, but he has a love relationship to the truth, he's open to listening, he's open to consider. And his actions, even while being marginalized, he doesn't hate rejection because the oppressors rejected him. He hates the abuse, the mechanisms of oppression, and he's willing to come running. But when God delivers a message, and one of the ways that it's like a sign that this is the truth from God, is he sends one person from among the community to confirm. Again, one person. We saw that with Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, that one person will stand up and support the message. It doesn't send the crowd. You could see always falsehood has this sort of behind the scenes plotting and planning plot to destroy the truth. Whereas I noticed throughout the Quran that when a prophet comes, then one person comes running. We saw that in Prophet Moses, a man from the kingdom of the Pharaoh stands up and starts to defend Moses upon him peace. So similarly, you see that where one person comes, and it's meant to be not an overpowering, wearing you down. It's meant to be one to make you reflect, make you consider, make you think. It's meant, again, that wakener, that shaker is getting to your conscience. It's not trying to wear you down or overpower the ego. It's meant to go like an arrow going straight to the conscience. So Habib Najar arrives late, perhaps coming from the outskirts of town, hurrying to speak to his fellow townsmen who seem on the verge of stoning the prophets. He comes, the Quran tells us, running. The man doesn't run in because he's relying on the prophets as heroes or saviors. So he's not even looking to get some benefit from the prophets. It's not a connect, like the one with Moses in the Moses story. He wasn't looking for Moses to give him something. He considered the argument, it is the correct argument, and he listened to it and he felt it's beneficial, and he's saying, wait, listen. So the man doesn't run in again, but he respects their message. Habib Najar speaks eloquently about the prophet's message, calling them rightly guided and reminding his fellow townspeople that the messenger asked for no compensation and no payment. So they're not looking for something in return. They're not saying, we want to bring you down, we want to be in charge, and we want the money, Why should I not worship he who created me and to whom you will be returned? Since Habib Najar shared most of his wealth out of love for his people, he easily understood the heart of the prophet's message. Because usually the mechanisms of oppression is, how do you get to be these VIP powerful people? You've oppressed quite a few people in town and subjugated them to you. If not, physically, then probably economically. His heart was innocent, and thus he could only receive the message, but it gave him the courage to share the message with genuine concern and to benefit all humanity. Yet after his eloquent appeal, the man is killed. After bearing witness that there is none worthy of worship except God, Habib Najar was mercilessly killed by the people of his town. One account says the people began to stone him while he was saying, "O God, guide my people, for they do not know." And they continued to stone him until he died a violent death. Yet he was still praying for them. Another account states that the people stamped on him until his intestines came out. While being tortured, he said, "I believe in your Lord again, so listen to me." Remember I said in the last chapter, listening versus distraction. Some say it was the angels who told Habib Najar enter paradise in order to give him spiritual strength. Others say it was God because the man was killed and was thereafter granted heaven and the honor of being a witness. And even after he made it to heaven, this man's main concern remained his people. It's thus we know he was speaking out of genuine love for his people. Even in heaven, he continued to think about his people, not out of obligation, but out of love. Would that my people knew that my Lord has forgiven me and made me of the honored ones. So it's something for us to kind of reflect on when we are seeking honor. That do we open our hearts to listen to truth? Do we critically think about it? are we open to defending it? Again, his defense did not come through games or plotting. It came open, transparent. And all he asked was, listen to the prophets. Counter oppression with faith, forbearance, and patience. Habib Najar clearly fights against the oppressive ways of his fellow townsmen, but he doesn't respond to abuse with abuse. Instead, he responds with faith, patience, and understanding. Doesn't arrive at the center of town with weapons. Instead, he remains connected to the vulnerability experienced all his life, and he speaks with both courage and faith. One of the things we can find in this man's story is that when you're fighting abusive power, it's important to worry about your soul. One of the worst things to happen while fighting abusive power is to your soul. While fighting abuse, it's important not to embrace the spirit of that abuse. So the first lesson in fighting abusive power is what not to do, and we should never assume we're immune from becoming an abuser. We should never lock ourselves in a love-hate relationship with the oppressor, like never have an awe of him while we are attacking the oppression. And that's how some people fight. They want to be in power. They want to be in that seat. They want to be the VIP person. Instead of recognizing that that whole infrastructure of how they came to be is wrong and having an awe of God, they end up having an awe of the oppressor. And one of the ways that we can protect our hearts from having an awe of the oppressor is to have an awe of God, and that comes through praise. If we constantly keep associating, praising God with the sunset, praising God with the sunrise, praising God if you see a beautiful mountain, or if you see there's so many ways that the Quran teaches you about to associate the praise of God, that it nurtures an awe of God in your heart that can protect you from being locked in this love-hate relationship with the oppressor. Hence, you can, like Habib Najar, raise your argument about oppression, raise your argument about the mechanisms of oppression, while not seeing the oppressor in awe and wanting so bad to be invited to the seat of the table. So sometimes you'll hear people they'll attack the oppressor, yet at the same time, as soon as they get an invitation to the White House, they go running just to be on the table. Or as soon as they get an invitation here or there, they go running to be at a seat at the table. So it's not they're there to deliver a message, but they're there because they're looking into their heart that they can probably climb that ladder of success. When fighting oppressive power, we should be wary of focusing on any particular abuser, any particular individual. Instead, we should fight the oppressor's actions. In this surah in the Quran, there are no names. We don't know the abuser's name. Neither do we know who in the town has ordered the prophets to stop speaking, nor who orders this innocent man's death. These men are not held up as bad guys who need to be vanquished, although the entire town, remember I said when a prophet comes in this particular state, 3 prophets, this is a deadly sign. Once a prophet comes, it means it's fatal. It's if you reject the prophet, it's fatal. And so what happens is the entire town, afterwards, after they killed that man, at an appointed time, it was destroyed. What's important isn't targeting an enemy, but rather targeting the abusive behavior. And this is what we saw, that he targeted their logic, he targeted their behavior. Moreover, Habib Najar didn't fight his neighbors in spirit of enmity and defiance. After he arrives in paradise, the man says, I wish my people could know. He doesn't say, aha, I won. Again, we get that from the story of Noah, that it's not about results. He only had 80 followers, but he's one of the most resolute prophets. Instead, in his heart, he still wants them to see what's right and to act according to what they see. Even though these people had ridiculed him and driven him to the edges of town, should we, as Habib Najar did, tolerate rejection? There's no reason for us to desire rejection. Like, who loves rejection? That's dumb and foolish. We all want to belong and be accepted, yet rejection still happens. Particularly in unjust societies, Habib Najar was rejected in his unjust town. The important thing is that we don't destroy our souls just to gain acceptance from abusive power. That's the important thing. It's not that we love rejection. It's that we don't compromise our own values to gain acceptance from abusive power. When Habib Najar came running from the outskirts of town, he didn't come to fight for the acceptance of his fellow townspeople. He wasn't angling for them to declare him right or handsome or to apologize for the damage they had done to him. He came to speak truth to power with courage, with faith, and dignity. Ultimately, his words shook the town. For this, the town leaders killed him. He didn't speak to their egos, but directly to their souls. When you're speaking truth to power, you're speaking directly to people's souls. Like I said, one person comes running and he's saying, listen. So you're reminding the soul of its truth. You know, it's kind of like when you want to listen to something, everyone says just hush, hush, hush. And I showed a video about listening to God. I forgot the speaker's name. Where it's like just, one person, it forces here you are having this very heated conversation and this one person comes in and they're just speaking and it forces you to your ego kind of goes in a short circuit where you're now listening to this one person speaking. And everybody's saying, what is this person kind of saying? So his words coming from a place of vulnerability stirred the people. For this reason, they felt threatened. Now, when one person, not a crowd, not thousands of people yelling, one person running and you feel threatened by that, you should check your heart. When one person who's not followed and doesn't have a crowd around them says something and you feel threatened, you should check your heart. An example of that would be in today's times is, what's his name? Colin Kaepernick. Like when what does he do? He just kneels. One person. He's just kneeling on the side. And then you were threatened by that. Again, that hush, that comment that's went straight to where, not the ego, but to the soul. And, if the soul is disconnected completely from the ego, like I showed in one of the videos, what happens is you become extremely threatened and enraged. One person who just kneels, not yelling, not shouting, just kneeling, and they're threatened. And so it stirs that conscience, that internal reality, and you should check your heart when you're bothered by one person without a crowd, just by themselves, coming, either saying listen or even silently protesting. So now the question is, part of the theme that I'm starting for this month, it's November 7th, 8th, 2021, is handling uncertainty. And I wanted to begin this chapter discussing it when I'm discussing this theme. And handling uncertainty, we talk about insecurity, and I mentioned here a story about where someone is insecure, facing death, facing failure, facing trials and tribulations. We might notice that this man didn't lead a revolution in his town. If his eloquence convinced any of his fellow townspeople in his lifetime, we don't really hear of it. Speaking truth to power is not about results. If we aim at results, then we'll start to engage in backward reasoning, and we see that, and I've mentioned, even some Jewish people who are very rabbis who are very convinced of their faith and they follow their faith throughout the years. They call out those who came up with this New Age thinking where they wanted a result. They went back. They resort to backward reasoning where they start to cut and paste and weave their if you will, their faith in a way that allows them to get that desired result. That's the negative part of, if your aim and your goal is the result, and the result becomes like the goal, not pleasing God, then what happens is you can start to cut and paste your faith and weave it in a way that justifies and rationalizes behaviors or actions and, if you will, teachings of your faith that are totally un-Islamic. And it doesn't just work for the Muslim faith, it's also other faiths as well. That's why you have to really be careful about obsessing with results. And if we have a result in mind, then we're opening again the door to oppressive tendencies. We start with the result, like I mentioned, we work backwards. We may be so attached to a particular result that we start on the path to evil actions. I mean, if you look at the situation in the state of Palestine, Israel, you see that what's happening. They have that result in mind, and they're working backwards, and they're cutting and pasting Judaic law in a way that allows ethnic cleansing, in a way that allows stealing of land, in a way that allows Jewish-only settlements to be connected to Jewish-only bypass roads, disconnecting an Arab town from another Arab town. So you start to, like I say, cut and paste your religion in a way that allows evil actions. That this attachment drives many to dump their values and rationalize all sorts of torture and abuse in the name of achieving a particular goal. Same thing happens, as they've mentioned, with psychologists, where it's supposed to be for healing and helping others. If your aim is results, or if your aim is careerism, then you can start to also take the field of psychology, twist it and distort it in a way that you can justify torture. And there have been psychologists who are involved in the torturing of individuals for the government, for example. It's science. You can start to, in the pharmacy industry, you can start to cut and paste scientific facts or scientific evidence or scientific results in a way that allows you to sell a particular product or to promote a particular, if you will, agenda. So it's this idea of results and then work backward. You can take any field of study, any field of science, any faith, and start to cut and paste and weave it to rationalize all sorts of evil. The result that's aimed for by the people of Ihsan, or people who are seeking to be seeking the pleasure of God, who act according to what pleases God, is God's acceptance of their deeds and aims. It's not the control of other people. Hence, the believers, knowing that, they know that they never fail if they're not followed. Like, I've listened to people and I've received tremendous insight from them, and they had like 5 followers, or sometimes I would be like the first person who would view their video, or, you know, it's, but they had tremendous insight. So you shouldn't be looking at how many followers someone has to check and see if you should follow that person. You listen to the argument. First and foremost, obviously, turn to God and ask God to protect your heart. Then check to see that person's argument, and check to see like if their references and their sources that they are using. Check to see like the critical thinking skills that they are using to present their argument. So just the fact that means someone doesn't have followers, like I said, they could be homeless, doesn't mean that they are trustworthy. And it doesn't mean if someone has 100,000 followers, doesn't mean that they are, again, pleasing to God. You should listen and look at the argument, learn critical thinking, and you should turn to God. Like, you should say, you know, I'm listening to this person, God, help me to determine if this person is true to you, and, you know, their teachings are pleasing to you or not. And usually, if you are sincere and true in turning to God, then God will help you to make the right decision. Again, faith is about handling uncertainty. It's never about controlling the wave of life. Instead, it's about facing this wave and acting in accordance with our values. This doesn't give us any guarantees, but rather leaves us open to uncertainty. Faith teaches us to always have hope and faith in God's promise. But we don't know when that promise will be realized. In the meantime, we have to speak truth to power in a way that's rooted in our values. Thus, you might say, Habib Najar, the man who came running, did not fail. He ran in to help, and he did exactly what his faith called him to do. He spoke according to his values, and he appealed to his fellow townspeople's conscience. The townspeople were so sure of themselves and their power that they couldn't even allow him to speak his few words. Here, Habib Najar acts as a witness for God against oppression. That's the honor that he had received. So again, facing insecurity, facing uncertainty, facing oppression, but also facing what was in material sense, not in a spiritual sense, of failure. He's a witness for the messengers and a witness for God on the day of judgment. So we're all going to exit this world. Now, in a spiritual sense, Habib Najar made his an honorable one. From a faith perspective, from a spiritual perspective, he won. He was an innocent who wanted what was best for humanity, and he died with honor. So I leave this here for you to think and reflect upon. Again, the aim of this particular is not to promote my book or to push it out there. It's to kind of like instigate, hopefully, that you would actually go into more depth of the story of Noah and read it about it. And like I said, if you can do binge watching of all these programs that are out there, that you would actually maybe like find somebody who speaks Arabic and do listen to some of these really long commentaries, scholarly commentaries on the story of Noah. Again, these are the stories that God used to nurture Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings. And it's really within the interest and your benefit to, I would say, make time to really know these stories. I mean, I benefited a lot from reading and listening to these lessons. Some of them, yes, they are long. You don't have to listen to all 18 hours in one shot. You can break it down. I would encourage you, though, to do make time out and really know the stories of the Prophet. Do know them a little more than just, like I gave you here a slice. Do try to get to know the stories more than just a slice here and there. Like it really does nurture you and help you to understand how the mechanisms of oppression work, how they think, how they reflect, or they don't actually reflect, how they distract the plots and the propaganda to destroy truth. And you see it reinforced. And when you see it in this day and age, you can start to see, like, strengthens your faith in how to see it. You know, it's like this man is here just silently protesting and everybody's up in arms. You can start to see and recognize who's the oppressor and who's the corrupter and who's the reformer just by listening and observing, silent witness and silent observer. So again, I leave it to you to reflect on this, and hopefully it will, I don't know, motivate you or encourage you or plant the seed of desire to know more about the story of Noah and to research it more in depth. It's a beautiful story, but it also teaches you that faith is not about results. So I will do, inshallah, God willing, follow-up videos that will take some of those lessons from the commentary by Imam Sha'rawi as well as Suzanne Hanif, and share it with you in the month of Rabi' al-Akhir, or the last spring, another term for it is, and I am working on just reflections on facing or handling uncertainty. So thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.